Have you ever thought to yourself, there's nothing left to do in Skyrim? Maybe you've never got over Serana turning you down that one time after Dawnguard. Well, this time we're delving even deeper into Nolvus, a modlist for Skyrim, and it's part 2 of a series of videos showcasing its features, from new quests, followers, player homes and combat features. This isn't just Skyrim anymore, but something else altogether. Ah, Riverwood. Countless times have we walked down from the standing stones, alongside the path of the flowing river, and arrive in this quaint little village. It's here you're introduced to a lot of the base mechanics in Skyrim, from chopping wood, smithing a dagger, tanning some leather, mixing a potion here or two. You get the idea. It's a perfect place for us to start our guided journey through Nolvus. Before we can get here though, we need to first discuss a couple of options in the installer. Starting with a quick example of the difference between Redux and Ultra. For those who are wondering, there are several configurations of Nolvus due to the people having various different hardware limitations. The installer comes with a more stripped down version called Redux. That's less intense on foliage, city and town overhauls and textures. It's still good, but after playing an Ultra with a rig capable of running it smoothly, there's no way I would play on Redux after experiencing Nolvus in its full glory. If you're not getting a stable frame rate, it's worth lowering the ini settings in the Nolvus dashboard to see if this drastically improves your performance. There's also Pure Dark's paid DLSS mod on Patreon, which I might not agree with it being locked behind a paywall, but it did give me an extra 20 frames, so I can't complain when everything was cranked up. Overall, it's purely going to be dependent on your PC, and before you start posting your PC setups and asking me if it will run, I'm not the one you should be asking. There is an incredibly helpful Discord, however, that I'll leave a link for down below. So with that out of the way, I think it's time for us to boot up the game and run through the Alternative Start mod in Nolvus, which is not the mod called Alternative Start, but a more configurable mod named Skyrim Unbound. This tends to be where a lot of people trip up and don't know what to do, so let me explain and show off some of its features. When you're loaded in, you're going to see a lot of things popping up. Don't panic, this is perfectly normal. All the mod scripts are just doing their thing. We need to access Skyrim Unbound's MCM. MCM stands for Mod Configuration Menu and is accessed from the main menu here. First we're going to want to click into the main tab. This shows us some vital information that is very important. Do you want to be a Dragonborn or not? Most people are going to say yes. To help make sure you've got the intended settings, you can load the Nolvus preset here, which I always do for a base. How and when we trigger the main quest is configurable here. In order to become a Dragonborn, the correct option needs to be set, and the player character needs to kill and absorb a soul of a dragon. Spawning one in by a console does not trigger this. Next up is choosing a standing stone, should you want to. It's important that you read the prompts telling you what these do, as they're not vanilla and are reworked with Andromeda standing stones. I personally recommend Apprentice, allowing you to have no mana cost on novice spells. And of course we've got Disease for base Vampire and Werewolf here. Once you're happy with everything, head back to the main tab and click on Let's Go to begin character creation. Once you've got yourself familiar with the surroundings, keybinds and equipment, I think it's time that we headed across the river and up the hill to the tower before Bleak Falls. This should give you a moderately controlled environment to test out combat mechanics. I explained stances and additional attack in part 1, and I received a bunch of comments asking me about enemy AI and difficulty, as in general it's a concern that the flashy animations make things too easy. If this is a concern for you, I highly recommend that in the install process you tick on hardcore mode. This adds a stagger and poise system along with a more aggressive AI that will react to you more harshly. Foes will now block and parry your attacks consistently, ranged enemies will actively keep their distance and in general be evasive. Some enemies will even taunt you with a cheeky little dance move to bait you closer, which is both hilarious and unexpected. The trick to playing hardcore is to dodge as often as possible, don't get greedy and keep your guard up. If you see multiple enemies closing in, it's best to reposition. Being hit multiple times will result in being stagger locked and easily slain. It can be frustrating, but I have to admit that it's made me rethink fights, taking a more tactical and guarded approach. and when you're in a pinch, there is a quick potion keybind, which has its own drinking animation, forcing you again to pick your moment-to-moment choices with a level of awareness and skill, rather than simply unga-bungering your way through dungeons. The world is also de-leveled in hardcore. This means that enemies don't scale to your current level and instead are static, so you could stumble across some low-level bandits, which might be quite easy, or the dungeon could be littered with giga-chad mercenaries armed to the teeth and ready to dance on your unprepared adventurer's corpse. As you can see, enemies will also use potions to heal, and will retreat to do so. It can be tricky when facing multiple foes to apply necessary pressure to take down your target. Just a tip from me, I would suggest prioritizing mages and archers first, while dodging and blocking advancing melee opponents. After a few fights, it's time we leveled up. If during the install you selected alternative leveling, you're going to need to rest up in order to level up your skills. It's probably a good thing right now as well, because we're pretty beat up and limping thanks to the underdog animations. I love this immersion that this mod brings. This is a good visual indicator that we need to heal. Once you've laid down, press T to sleep. Any amount of time should prompt the level up if you've gained enough XP. This is where we select which skills that you'd like to advance in. I find this to be my preferred method of leveling, as it makes more tedious skills to level, such as crafting, way less tedious. Ultimately though, I think this one is down to preference. Just remember that it's optional, like all the other major features that we've currently talked about, such as the alternative start mod Skyrim Unbound, hardcore, and now this alternative leveling. So now that you know how to get started on your adventure, let's talk about what comes after you've become the Akatosh blessed Dragonborn. You've learnt the way of the voice and become Skyrim's saviour. The world has heard your Thuum, and Alduin is removed from the lands of Tamriel. But a hero's work is never done. Whether you side with the Blades and slay Pathronax, or seek out new lands and treasures, you're going to need a build worthy of a Dragon Slayer. So let me show you my Dragonborn Ranger.
Let those that watch from Sovngarde envy us this day!
First up, we have the Alchemist Cookbook. We can now drop paralysing oils to deal with advancing enemies. Pair this with Walking Disaster, we now randomly drop all types of oils during combat. This will trigger Witchmaster. This grants us buffs from a pool of 40 different effects. Active buffs can be seen in the top right. We'll be specialising in shock-based destruction magic, so we can get perks like Magnetize to immobilise targets. And we'll cast those shock spells with our bow thanks to the Lion's Arrow perk. While dual casting a spell, using this power will save it and will now cast on every drawn bow with no mana cost. One of my favourites was the Arclight Chain spell, which spreads shock damage from target to target and also applies damage over time. I also didn't know that you could magnetize dragons. We're going to need a melee weapon to deal with things up close, and I'm going to go with one-handed war axes for the Mangle perk, which is great for armor pen. And Unleash the Beast for the Frenzy for the big damage on power attacks is just too good to pass up. The builds aim to be very versatile, and paired with shouts we can basically deal with anything. Hunt Together will spawn a Spirit Wolf, which is surprisingly good at tanking and deals a decent amount of damage depending on your remaining stamina. Engage with a bow shot first, and then have the wolf take aggro and rush the target with melee. The voice was a gift of the goddess Kynareth at the dawn of time. The mod Thunderchild adds a shrine to her in High Hrothgar's library. It's here that we can learn brand new shouts and meanings to words of power. This pairs really nicely with Wintersun's Faith of Skyrim, as Nords can choose to worship Kynareth right from the start. This really doubles down on the Ranger playstyle, as a lot of Nord hunters worship Kine anyway. It's perfect for our Dragonborn Thunder Ranger. You can meditate here to engage in a minigame where your stamina will be depleted. The aim is to stop the meditation just before you run out of stamina. You'll have to guess though, as the HUD is removed shortly after starting. If you're successful, you'll be granted new meanings to words of power and obtain new shouts to use. Wildlife will often be highlighted for you to hunt in order to gain favour with Kynareth so that you can meditate for more shouts, along with other repeatable quests such as donating gold to the Greybeards or shouting to the heavens. As for new shouts, my top pick for this build is Stormblast to energise our power attacks into thunderous fists of Talos. We can use this more often with the help of Force Redoubled, a speechcraft perk which grants us 50% chance to reduce a cooldown of any shout to 3 seconds. We're also incredibly evasive thanks to the stacking movement speed buffs from Windborn in the speechcraft perk tree, along with Windspeaker, a passive gain from worshipping Kinnereth. We can completely mitigate all damage using the Lightning Shield shout, which is incredibly clutch when playing on hardcore plus legendary difficulty, and still get staggered, so don't get too cocky though. The Phantom Decoy shout has saved me on a number of occasions by taking aggro, giving me a clean shot. An immersive pick for this build would be True Shot, which enchants your arrows with the power of Kine, allowing her to smite targets with an AoE from above. Sometimes a vanilla shout is all that you need though. You can't really fault the slow time shout. After all, it gives you enough breathing room to plan your next few attacks and scope out what the enemy is doing. Definitely helpful if you're outnumbered in a tense situation. You can even play the role of a healer with a livestream shout, which the final word will change the weather, raining down heals over time to you and your allies. Praying to Kinnereth and becoming devout to her will grant access to Kinnereth's emissary. This is a giant fluffy Sabrecat that you can use as a mount to roam the lands with. I do find this both immersive and better than keeping track of a horse all the time. I think the Sabrecat is just the cherry on top of our Kine worshipping Dragonborn. Oh, and I almost forgot, on top of everything that I've shown you for this playstyle, there's also a Dragonborn custom skill tree, and I highly recommend that you snatch up the Way of the Voice perk for reduced shout cooldowns. There's also features like Hunterborn that tie in really nicely with this playstyle, and it definitely feels like that you could truly live off the land and be a true son of Skyrim.
The Aedra are weak. Nothing but illusion. They cannot feed the starving. They cannot warm the freezing. But I am here to save you. If even a spot of corruption touches your soul, the gates to my realm will open wide for you.
It's time we talked about modded questlines in Nolvus, starting off with the absolute behemoth by Viken, named Vigilant. To no one's surprise, you'll be joining the Vigilant of Stendarr to rid the world of Daedra, witches, vampires and ghouls. As you progress, you'll soon notice that something is not quite right with the Vigilants, and your faith in Stendarr will certainly be tested as things get stranger and stranger. Without spoiling too much, the quest spirals its way through several acts, leading you through vast catacombs, underground cities, haunted mansions, and even an entire Daedric realm to explore. The latter being the biggest chunk of content and takes a more Souls-like approach, where you are left to explore with minimal hand-holding. There's a ton of backstory hidden away as well for you to discover, along with multiple endings to the quest, giving you some incentive to play through this on another character.
Fragile. How very fragile mortals are.
In true Souls-like fashion, you seek the path forward. You fight your way through countless enemies, and along the way, you arrive at what could only be an ominous boss room. Slay the boss, and as always, reap the rewards. More often than not though in Vigilant, these bosses have unique weapons, custom models and abilities known as weapon arts. These weapon arts can only be used when wielding the weapon that grants it, and are reminiscent of one of the boss mechanics, like this katana that grants us invisibility and movement speed. If you try to spawn these weapons in, they won't grant the weapon art, meaning you have to slay the boss and loot the weapon if you want to gain its power. Like the Sword of Jiglag, which you can slam into the ground, causing these electrical spikes to blast everything and also triggering destruction perks. Another fave of mine was the Frost Sword of Mara that leaves your enemies in a swirling blizzard of icy death. There's some chunky boys in Vigilant, one of which we got this Warden's Lance from, allowing you to use a move called Bloodwave Magic that procs bleed on the target. The Mercy of Stendarr will blast foes away in an AoE, and the Hammer of Zenithar will send an icy torrent of destruction along the ground in a frontal attack. There's no cooldown on these powers, but they do cost mana to cast. The Dragon Knight's sword grants you ebony flesh along with energy waves on side and backward power attacks. Arguably the coolest for me was Umril's sword that spawns these golden orbs that spew lightning towards wherever you're looking. The section of the quest to get this weapon was also probably my favourite. With a similar vibe, the Dawn Spear summons lightning strikes to rain down in a large radius. I'm going to leave the rest for you to discover on your own. I'd love to hear from you though about your favourite bosses and weapons in Vigilant. It was a no-brainer to play a Paladin for this Vigilant playthrough, so let's take a look at the build outside of the weapon art with my Star of Stendarr Paladin. So to mix things up with astral magic, we can deliver Stendarr's mercy with the magic from Aetherius. Using Astral Rune can be a great tool to engage as it summons a magic wisp to distract your enemies with. This engagement is particularly dangerous with the amount of enemies here, so let's thin the herd. Let's drop an Astral Meteor using the Astral Strike spell. This can only be used outside and covers the area in astral flames. Caution advised though, as the flames can also damage you. I tried casting a follow-up spell here and get staggered. Thankfully a lot of the damage from the mage's attack was mitigated by Mage Ward. With this perk, you'll raise a ward whenever you're casting a spell. Paired with some of the restoration perks that we'll talk about shortly, we survived this rush from the enemy here. When enemies are clumped together, the Astral Shower spell does excellent AoE when placed well and has a very satisfying effect. The real threat in this fight, however, has been this Electro Mage and her Golem. I've been trying to keep out of her line of sight, but it is time to deal with her. So first I attempt to try and power bash her, thinking that she's rushing me with a dagger, but she's still got a full bar of mana. The Astral Blitz spell does huge damage to Magicka and Stamina. Stripping targets of their resources can give you the edge to resolve a fight. Sadly, this mage is just not quitting though, and has insane regen for some reason. So to get through her mage armor for a swift kill, I use the Astral Wave spell. This melts both magic resistance and armor rating, leaving targets vulnerable, so we can finish her off with a well-timed combo. If you fancy mixing it up or you're out of mana, I suggest using the shield to isolate threats with the Cast Aside perk. Power bash an enemy as they're attacking to knock them down, so that you can deal with another threat while they recover. Face of the Mountain can help mitigate a threat by simply punishing them for hitting you, staggering or knocking down your enemies. The Unstoppable Force perk allows you to ram enemies with your shield. Simply hold block and then start sprinting to activate. And if you're worried about getting one-shot by a chonky boy, the Astral Light spell can rend enemies of their weapon damage, making a tough fight a little bit more bearable. Also periodically getting stamina and magicka while stripping the same from enemies with Warrior's Flame, which bounces between us and enemies, and the follow-up perk Sacred Flame will allow us to heal us and our allies as well. We can't call ourselves a Paladin without some sort of smite ability. For this one we're using Conduit and a vanilla Restore spell to get Guiding Strike. This grants us extra damage and some healing. Praying to Stendarr can gain you even more damage to block, Daedra and Undead, and being Devotee gains you the Channel Divinity option while praying for even more buffs and a cool visual effect. There's also a custom skill tree that requires you to wear an Amulet of Stendarr to gain some incredibly strong passives, including resistances, enhanced crit chance, crit damage, and stronger ward spells. From holy paladins to the very unholy dead, marching towards Whiterun with the sound of clashing steel and creaking bone. There's got to be some evil behind these attacks, something or someone pulling the strings to these nightmarish puppets. One would think that the Worm King Mannimarco had returned to wreak havoc across the lands by raising armies of the undead. Well, I think it's time that we showed you one of the most asked about playstyles in my comment section, and that is none other than the Path of the Necromancer. So to get started, you'll need the Bone Collector and its follow-up perks, allowing you to loot bones from corpses, get all 11 pieces and you can build a skeleton. This is made way easier with the Conjure Altar perk, and further into the tree you'll be able to create Skelly Mages with a variety of elemental and utility options. Once you've got enough bones walking, you'll want to start scaling their damage and health using Fire Ritual. This spends the resources of making a Skelly and instead boosts the capabilities. And while I do think Skellies do put in the work, sometimes they can get lost, and in general just trusting Skyrim's AI is not always the play, so it's best to make sure that you're also capable of defending yourself, or you could also take control of one of the Skellies if you enjoy that Puppet Master playstyle. You'll need Dead Tide to scale the maximum number of Skellies that you have, and they will teleport to your location if you get separated when out of combat. I quite enjoyed the Rallying Standard Heavy Armor perk as well, for that Army of the Dead Legion vibe, and to bolster our undead army's ranks even more, I use the Twilight Skeleton Army spells to get an extra 8 Skellies on the field. With all this combined together with a scythe-wielding heavy-plated Necromancer, you and your undead army should be able to take on anything. The scythes in particular are insane. I highly recommend that you use the power attack in the blue stance for this overhead spin that just seems to turn enemies into mush. Poison magic is also extremely strong for this build because it won't hurt your skellies. I like to use a mixture between frost and poison along with the scythe. We aren't stopping there however, as we can go one step further by becoming undead ourselves with the mod Undeath. After a long chain of quests, our thirst for knowledge into the dark arts grants us the ability to become a powerful Lich. At first I wasn't too impressed by the transformation, but after messing around with the staff and spell combos boosted by the Lich perks, it absolutely dominates groups of enemies thanks to the spell Viper's Strike, which is an AoE knockdown and paralysis spell, allowing your undead army to hack away in peace unchallenged. There's a frosty theme to some of the perks in the Lich tree, like Icy Step, which grants a trailing path of ice from you during combat. It can be quite useful considering all the enemies are just on the ground. As mentioned, there is a custom skill tree which you can access here. A must-have perk I have to say is going to be the Living Dead, so that you can get the benefits from more conventional healing and food, although I wouldn't worry too much about dying, as you won't be able to truly die anymore, and instead your body is just rebuilt in your Necromancer's lair. Perfect for those who don't want to save scum, although getting back to where you died might be a little frustrating. Even though Necromancy isn't my preferred playstyle, I had a blast testing it out, and I do think it's worth experiencing and getting you out of your comfort zone. Speaking of comfort, why don't we take a look at some of the player homes added to Nolvus, starting off with Sicarius' Refuge, a small unsuspecting shack with a hidden trapdoor leading down into a true hitman's hideout, perfect for an assassin to lay low in. The home features a lab for you to brew poisons and potions, a place to spar with a training dummy, and a rather intimidating guard dog. You can soak off the stench of the marshlands or hail Sithis with this feature piece shrine, which really makes the home stand out in my opinion. There's even a spare room for a young protege, should you have one, not to mention a master bedroom with a striking glass window, and there's plenty of storage of course for you to hang up your old cape after an evening of good old fashioned murdering. I also really like that this isn't too edgy. It feels remarkably cozy considering it's a home for a professional killer. I actually prefer a compact home, a place to pop in, stash my loot, hold my gear, and then rest up before heading off on another quest. Definitely a great home for a would-be assassin, but what if you're looking for something with a better locale? For a home buyer, location can be everything of course. In any case, I think my favourite has to be Riverfall Cottage, on the outskirts of Riverwood where all of us started our OG Skyrim journey. So why not retire and raise a family with this incredible cottage, with its cosy statement piece fire pit in the centre of the ground floor, next to the kitchen that just looks like it's lived in. And it's pretty well stocked as well. There's plenty of storage for all your loot, along with plaques and mannequins to display your weapons and armour to all your guests visiting as you dine in the dining room. There is of course a bar to get merry, a master bedroom to get some rest, and a bath should you have the Keep It Clean mod activated, which is a mod that adds dirt to your character over time. The rest of the home's features are on the outside, with a forge overlooking the river's waterfall, and a tower on the other side that has a selection of ingredients to pick below, and upstairs you've got the lab and enchanter. Just outside Whiterun we have the Elysium Estate, which is ready for a new owner. Speak to the spirit tending the garden to begin the process of claiming it for your own. This is a very cosy home with lots of space, storage and displays, and everything that you could possibly need for crafting is included either around or inside the property, and it's beautifully decorated. It's perfect to have your followers rest up here before heading out again on your next adventure. Speaking of followers, let me show you some of the more popular editions that are fully voiced with thousands of unique dialogue, including interactions with each other. They're certainly well-known mods at this point, but if you're new to the scene, well, you're in for a treat.
How do you know if a dragon has been in your garden? Your livestock are dead and your home is gone. It's not a joke, dragons are no laughing matter.
Is there not an element of doubt in every choice?
True. I'm talking about self-doubt though. Not deciding what I'll eat for dinner or what boots to wear.
My top picks has to be the extremely popular Khajiit Inigo and the Imperial Tourist Lucian, as they riff off each other, giving you that D&D adventure party feeling. They're hilarious, flawed, and at times will even comment on current events, locations and NPCs. I'm someone that doesn't really like followers getting in the way, but these two have so much charm to them that even I will occasionally bring them out on an adventure or two.
Interesting. I've never really been sniffed out before. And yes, just to confirm your suspicions, I am a vampire. But I'm not that kind of vampire. The blood-sucking, monstrous fiend you're probably thinking about. I don't have any interest right now in sucking out your blood. Nor, I don't think I ever will.
On top of new followers, even Serana has been completely reworked with the Serana Dialogue add-on. This fleshes out the character with loads more dialogue, and can even lead to romance should you enjoy the Daughter of Coldharbour. And who doesn't enjoy a vampire goth girl with daddy issues?
It doesn't fully satiate the appetite, but it staves off hunger for a while. So, don't worry. I won't go feral on you or anything, just because I haven't had a daily meal.
There's a ton more followers added with the interesting NPCs mod, not to mention Toccata, who has a unique script to heal you on low health. She's by far the best healer despite her dialogue not being as fleshed out. She's my top pick for a combat support. Moving on, I wanted to answer a common question in my comments, which is regarding first-person combat. It's absolutely changed from vanilla, thanks to the comprehensive first-person animation overhaul, paired with stances to give you a ton of options from thrusting attacks, overhead swings, and side slashes. These are of course weapon dependent, and choosing the right stance for the right situation can really save you from a tricky one. Due to the precision mod, there's now collision with walls and objects, meaning if you're in a tight space, it may be best to opt for a stab, thrust, or overhead chop rather than a side swipe that will have your character recoiling from the impact from the wall. While I prefer third-person combat, I have to say that after some time adjusting to changing stances more fluidly, I really enjoyed the combat in first person. While it's not exactly as fluid as something like Mordhau or Chivalry, it's definitely a step in the right direction for variety's sake. If you want to know more about stances, I recommend that you check out my first video on Nolvus. While the combos are different because it's third person I'm showing, the keybinds and the MCM still apply and will help you adjust. On to new lands now. I thought we'd take a peep at Beyond Reach, which is a DLC-sized mod that takes place in the east of High Rock.
The Forsworn attacked this tower.
No, friend. Not Forsworn. Witchmen. Thought I told you about these devils already?
Must have forgotten.
The mod has a very bleak setting, with the region being torn apart by a feud between the Bretons and the Orcs, undead roaming the lands, and menacing griffins, to name a few of the hardships to come. Its fully voiced NPCs vary in quality, but overall is pretty solid and kept me immersed and intrigued to continue.
Come to hear the latest news, lest you forget that there's more to the Reach than your own bridge.
And while I haven't finished this one yet, I've noticed there's branching paths and choices which can lead you to different outcomes, so playing through another character can yield different results. The dungeon level design was top tier, with some stunning visuals and concepts like an Oblivion Gate that had been experimented on. The overall tone of the lands in the Reach makes you feel a bit on edge, which I believe is deliberate, and you can really tell that the people who live here are going through some harsh times, and the tension is definitely rising. Like these orc refugees.
There's been hatred against my kind in these lands for the longest time, but with that Orsinium's sons raiding and causing their stir among the Bretons.
One of the quests had me taking sides with either the Bretons or the Orcs, and I decided to raid the Orc encampment with the aid of some Breton knights, which felt like an actual military skirmish, and it even had its own boss fight with a chonky Orc chief. There's a lot of world building going on with two sides to every story that can make you question if you did the right thing. So if you're looking for a fresh land to explore and grim tales yet to be told, definitely check out Beyond Reach. To start this one, you need to visit a main town after leveling up a bit, I think around about 5. You should be greeted by a priestess and her bodyguard, which triggers the quest. I'd definitely get yourself geared before you head out to the Reach, as the Witchmen, Orcs, Demons and Griffins are definitely no joke. Last but not least, I wanted to show you my favourite quest mod, which is Project AHO. If you love Morrowind, you'll appreciate the rich Dunmer content here.
I see you are awake. Great, we have time for a little chat. There are a few rules you must follow before I set you free. From now on, Embark, you are forbidden to leave Sadrith Kegra till you get your freedom. You can go wherever and do whatever, as long as it's within the settlement.
The mod takes place in a hidden Dunmer settlement, which is powered by an Ethereum core that the Telvanni magical structures use to thrive and maintain themselves. Apart from having interesting and sometimes comical characters, the real star of the show is Cedrith Cagran itself. The luminescent glow from the fungal structures and flying wisps that reflect off the pools of water really just drop your jaw when you see them for the first time. There's tons of puzzles, dungeons and places to delve into, and the entire mod has high quality voice acting. I can't help but smile when I engage with some of my favourite characters from this mod, and nearly every location is a work of art in its own right. Speak to the innkeeper in Kynesgrove about a dodgy looking orc to start the quest. You'll wind up being kidnapped and sold off at auction to the Telvanni settlers.
On to lot number 4! An Outlander, so fret not. With a pea-sized brain, it's hardly Dunmer. Off to your property for a meager 300 septums.
You'll be bought by Shanath Selfrey, who's a mad scientist with a bionic eye with no regard for the rules. He's completely bonkers, but it's hard not to like him as a character due to his erratic behaviour and dialogue.
It is the greatest of all known library.
You'll be his errand boy during your time as a slave, and later can choose to side with either him or his rival. Yen Yilu is much more mild-tempered and less batshit insane. He's curious about your role in all of this and why you're helping Shanath Selfrey. I'll leave it up to you to pick whose side you're on, and let this scene just do all the talking here.
Allow me to introduce myself. Yen Yilu, Magister of House Telvanni. You serve Shanath, then? This role doesn't suit you for some reason. I'll ask again. Is Shanath in the library? What in oblivion is that?
What are you doing here, Yen? Spying on us?
No time for this. Better you tell me what the Spriggan is going on.
A library spider tried to snatch my book away from me. I sent the bugger on its way. What else do you think I should have done?
You're even more stupid than I thought. Hey, you! Come here and ready your weapon or whatever it is you've got. It's about to get hot.
This is your first real boss fight in Project AHO, and has custom models for the Dwemer machines marching towards you. Not to mention, considering that you're not in your own gear, but equipment that's been given to you by your eccentric master at this point, well, it's going to be a tough fight, even with 2 Telvanni mages to back you up. Hopefully this is enough to convince you to try out Project AHO, and explore this hidden world with its rich storytelling, backed up with great voice acting and stunning visuals. Not to mention a very unique player home that I think I'll leave as a surprise for you to discover all on your own. Well, with this video being over half an hour long now, and 690 gigs of footage on my computer, I think it's time that we wrapped things up and save the rest for another day. There's so much more to show and tell, and I guess if this video does well, and you guys like it, I'm sure I'll be back for round 3. This one took longer than expected to release due to all the research and filming required for the builds and quests. I hope you enjoyed this second installment of my Nolvus review. I'd love to know what you guys want to see, and if there's any other games on Modlist that you'd like me to review. And as always, a huge thank you to my patrons, Relentless Bastards, and of course Vector for curating this incredibly breathtaking mod list. Without his hard work, so many would never get to see what the modding community is truly capable of. Skyrim's a game that, despite Bethesda's best attempts to ruin, has stood the test of time due to the community consistently releasing top-tier content in the developer's absence. Mod lists like Nolvus are a result of all the modders' hard work, and it's important that we understand the love and care these guys put into their mods. If there's something that you don't like in a mod pack, well, you can most certainly change it. You just need the knowledge to do so. That's the beauty of modding, right? To tailor your experience the way you like it. So if you have questions, suggestions or hot takes, feel free to get in touch or comment below. As mentioned before, for any help with Nolvus, please make sure that you join the Nolvus Discord for any modding, tech or gameplay help. I do plan to do a performance guide and MCM standalone video as well at some point, not to mention that it's now 2024, so happy new year everyone. Don't forget that Vector is also working in Nolvus V6 to release sometime later this year. Honourable mentions to Guild, Geralith and Guyton for all their help and knowledge. Do me a favour and hit that sub button to fuel the fire of my forge on creating more of these videos for you. That's all for me now folks, ciao for now.